Revealing my worst mistake, he noticed my Fitbit watch showing high levels of activity at night. My name is Kim, 36 female, married to Paul, 39 male, for 6 years now. We had been a happy couple until I felt sexually dissatisfied in my marriage, which led to me finding pleasure outside of it. I did not know that just the data of activity on a Fitbit could turn against me and ruin the balance I created in my life. I had left my Fitbit on my dresser and forgot about it, as I was getting late for work. I realized after 2 hours that I must have left it at home. I didn't think much of it as what could have happened for getting a stupid activity watch at home. Since the day I left my Fitbit at home, I started noticing that Paul had been keeping a close eye on my whereabouts. He started questioning where I was going and with whom, when I would be back, and if he could pick me up. It was weird as Paul was never the kind of person to do such things. It did come out as suspicious that he would try to be so sweet after 6 years of being married. I decided to confront Paul about his behavior and ask him directly why he was suddenly so interested in my daily activities. It turned out that he had been feeling insecure about our relationship and wanted to make more of an effort to show his love and care for me. It was like an alarm for me to maybe dumb down my affair for a while, till Paul feels a bit secure in our relationship. I knew that trying to assure him that he was overreacting would only cause him to be much more insecure than he already was. I came up with a new plan and started adding sleeping pills to Paul's dinner so that he could be sound asleep. I would then slowly check on him and go out to meet Caleb every night. I knew it was wrong and might backfire, but I felt trapped in my marriage and needed an escape. The guilt weighed heavily on me, but the thought of being with Caleb made it all seem worth it. It was a new thrill in my life to sneak in and feel like a teenager again. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a double life, but the excitement of meeting Caleb overshadowed any sense of morality. The risk of getting caught only added to the adrenaline rush, making me feel more alive than I had in years. Paul caught me red-handed one day when I was at the park taking my usual evening walk. I did not realize that Paul had been following me all along. He saw me meeting Caleb and doing a few rounds with him. He suddenly appeared out of nowhere and asked me who Caleb was. I lied to him that Caleb was my running partner at the party, and we kind of motivated each other. I just blurted out whatever made sense at that moment. It was a narrow escape as I could see a sense of relief on Paul's face. I was thankful that Paul showed up at the right time before we proceeded to our actual activities after our run. I immediately knew that I needed a new game plan to keep my affair under wraps from Paul. I decided to be more cautious and avoid meeting Caleb in public places. I made a mental note to only communicate with him through discreet means to prevent any further suspicion from arising. The park was no longer our secret spot, and we had to figure out something else. But the atmosphere at home was getting too tense with Paul questioning my whereabouts. He would randomly show up at work to pick me up or take me out for lunch someday. It was as if he did not want me to breathe freely. I was feeling trapped and suffocated. I knew I needed to have a conversation with him about boundaries and trust before things escalated further. Our relationship was beginning to feel more controlling than caring, and I needed to address it before it became toxic. I decided that I would have Paul sit and talk about it on the weekend. Before I could address it, Paul told me that he was going on a business trip and would be away next week. I felt a sense of relief and decided to postpone the conversation for a while later. I was also happy that maybe I would be able to meet Caleb in Paul's absence. I knew that this would be a welcome break for me. Paul was out on a business trip for 5 days. It gave me a sense of relief that I wouldn't have to cover my tracks for at least the next 5 days. I would have some breathing space and peace while he was away. I decided that maybe calling Caleb home would be my best bet. My Fitbit activity would alert Paul, so there was no way I could go out or leave it at home. Caleb was always up for a spontaneous adventure, and having him around would make the time pass more quickly. Plus, his presence would help distract me from the stress of keeping my activities hidden from Paul. I surprised Caleb by asking him to make up an excuse and come home for the week if he wanted to have a good time. I knew that it had been so long since we met and had fun, so I was sure that he would definitely be up for it. Caleb agreed without hesitation, excited at the prospect of spending time together and catching up. I couldn't wait for him to arrive and inject some much-needed excitement into my mundane routine. No. We had a wonderful time for the 5 days when Paul was away. We ordered takeout and had a lot of sex as we knew that it would be difficult for us to meet once Paul was back. We made sure to utilize every corner of the house and make memories everywhere. It was like a mini staycation for us, and we cherished every moment together. We knew we had to make the most of our time before returning to our normal routine. We made sure that we spent a lot of time having sex in every corner and every position that we could think of, as we knew that we might not get to do this again for a long time. We laughed, explored, and enjoyed each other's company to the fullest. It was a bittersweet reminder of how special our time together truly was. On Friday, it was early morning when I heard the doorbell and was so sleepy to check who it was. I walked to the window and saw that Paul was back a day earlier than expected. We were still in bed and naked, as we had a really long and tiring night. I panicked and did not know what to do. I was still hungover due to last night's drinks. It was hard for me to think straight. I quickly asked Caleb to hide in the closet till I dealt with Paul, and then looked for a chance to sneak out. I knew that there was no way I could get all of Caleb's stuff out of sight before Paul noticed it. I quickly threw on some clothes and went to greet Paul, trying to act as natural as possible. I hoped Caleb would be able to sneak out without being caught in the meanwhile. I tried to make sure that I held Paul in the living area as long as possible, trying to act as if I really missed him so that it gave enough time for Caleb to make his escape. I kept the conversation light and engaging, asking Paul about his trip and showing genuine interest in his stories. I knew that Paul was getting impatient to get to our room, and my efforts to hold him were failing. Paul finally told me that he couldn't hold his pee any longer and had to go. I knew that there was no way I could come up with an excuse to stop Paul now. Reluctantly, I let him go, watching as he hurried off to the restroom. As soon as he was out of sight, I quickly texted Caleb to let him know that Paul was on his way up. I couldn't believe how close we had come to getting caught. I followed Paul upstairs, hoping that Caleb received my text and had already left. I saw Paul standing with Caleb's phone in his hand. I could see Paul had a confused expression on his face. He said, "What does this message from me on this phone mean? Why does it say Mayday and danger approaching?" I froze in my tracks as I couldn't think of anything to answer. And he told me, why was my picture in lingerie on this phone? He demanded that I answer whose phone this was and answer honestly. I quickly realized that Caleb must have left his phone behind and Paul had found it. I tried to think of someone I could use as a cover. I blurted out that it must be our neighbor's phone who was here last night to stay over. She always tries to embarrass me with such pictures of mine. Paul's expression softened as he seemed to believe my explanation, but I could tell he was still suspicious. I prayed that my quick thinking would be enough to get me out of this situation unscathed. He then asked me why she did not stay back to meet him. I said that she was in a hurry as she was late for work. He said that he was going to call her husband and tell him that she forgot her phone and that he would quickly bring it to their house. I was sweating profusely as I knew that this would definitely lead me to being caught in my own web of lies. I quickly tried to think of a way to prevent him from calling her husband, but before I could come up with a plan, he had already dialed the number. My heart sank as I realized there was no way out of this situation. I told him to disconnect as it was not her phone. I knew that I couldn't keep up with the lies anymore. As he hung up the phone, I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. I knew that I had dug myself into a hole that I couldn't escape from. I asked him to take a seat and told him that this was Caleb's phone. He was here last night and might have forgotten it on his way out. I told him that I felt too lonely and that I might have been a little too drunk to realize what had happened. I told him that I might have gone overboard and slept with Caleb last night. I don't remember most of it, but I swore that this was the only time I was unfaithful in our relationship. I promised him that it would never happen again and that I would do whatever it takes to regain his trust. I begged for his forgiveness and hoped he could find it in his heart to give me a second chance. Paul sat there for a while without motion. I knew that it would take him some time to process what I had said. He finally spoke after 2 minutes and told me that he expected that at least now I would feel guilty and come completely clean to him. He now had realized that I deserved whatever he had planned as a punishment for me. His eyes bore into mine, filled with a mix of hurt and anger. I knew that his trust in me had been shattered, and it would take more than just words to mend it. Paul then asked me to have a seat and give him some time so that he could process all of this. It was understandable that he was hurt, and all this would have come like a shock to him. In the meanwhile, the doorbell rang, and I went downstairs with Caleb's phone as I did not want Paul to discover more information. I wanted him to believe that this was just a one-off thing that had happened. As I opened the door, I was surprised to see Caleb standing there with a bouquet of flowers, looking apologetic. I quickly ushered him inside before Paul could see him, hoping to prevent any further complications. I grabbed the bouquet and gave his phone back. I told him that I had handled it for now and he needed to lay low and not contact me until I gave him a green light. He quickly kissed me and made his way out. I knew that Paul finding out about Caleb showing up unannounced could potentially cause a lot of trouble, so I needed to handle the situation delicately. As Caleb left, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and anxiety about what would happen next. I went upstairs and my phone had started ringing like crazy. I was scared that Caleb did not completely get my message and started calling me. I panicked and tried to look for my phone. It was my sister calling me. I asked her what she wanted, and she asked me where I was and what I was doing. I told her that I was at home with Paul, but she sounded worried. I asked her what the matter was, and she said that the home group has a video of me playing with a man doing some crazy shit. I didn't quite understand what she was rambling about. I told her to calm down and explain to me exactly what was happening. She said that there was a video playing in our home group with me and another man probably in my bedroom kissing and doing more than that. I was almost naked and drinking and having fun. I felt shivers run down my spine as I slowly looked at Paul. There was a smirk on his face as if he knew what the conversation was about. I felt a mix of shock and anger as I realized that Paul had invaded my privacy and leaked the footage. I immediately knew that I needed to take action to protect myself and confront Paul, who was behind this malicious act. Paul looked at me and asked me if everything was okay, very well aware of what he had done. Paul told me that he had already known about my affair with Caleb and that I had been slipping sleeping pills to his dinner. He had planned this trip just to see how low I would stoop down in his absence. I was shocked and speechless, feeling guilty for my actions. Paul's revelation hurt more than I could have imagined. I was shocked to know that he was aware of it already. I never expected him to find out, let alone confront me about it. The weight of my deception and his disappointment was crushing. He told me that he had been waiting for me to come completely clean, and when I didn't, he had no choice but to have streamed the entire feed of our house to our families, and also to Caleb's wife. I had no clue that everything that me and Caleb had been doing at home was directly being watched by everyone without our knowledge. I felt a wave of embarrassment and invasion of privacy wash over me as I realized the extent of Paul's actions. The thought of our personal moments being broadcasted without consent made me feel violated and exposed. I couldn't believe that Paul had taken such drastic measures to force me to confess. The betrayal and violation of trust left me feeling devastated and humiliated. I told Paul that he made a very big blunder by violating my personal space and showing the footage to my family. It was more than I had done by cheating on him. I felt hurt and betrayed by his actions, as I never expected him to invade my privacy in such a way. I told him that I must have cheated on him, but never tried to ruin the peace of his family. He should not have involved my family into this mess. As I was speaking to him, Caleb kept repeatedly calling me. I kept ignoring his calls as I wanted to deal with Paul first. He then sent me a voice message which I decided to listen to later. Paul told me that he did what he felt was right. I deserved this much for lying and betraying him, and above all making up new stories to keep up the lies. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was clear that Paul was not going to forgive me, no matter what I said or did. As I listened to his harsh words, I realized that our relationship was truly over. I was speechless and sat down on the bed, not knowing what to do. I finally remembered Caleb's voice message. In the voice message, Caleb revealed that his wife had found out about our infidelity through the videos that were shared by Paul. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, realizing that my actions had consequences beyond what I had anticipated. This situation was spiraling out of control, and I knew I needed to confront the truth head-on before it caused any more damage. I quickly dialed Caleb's number, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared to face the consequences of my actions. As the phone rang, I braced myself for the difficult conversation that awaited me. Caleb started screaming at me as soon as I started to speak. He abused me for ruining his marriage and sending his wife such videos that would end his relationship. I listened to his angry words, feeling the weight of my mistakes crashing down on me. Despite the hurtful accusations, I knew I had to take responsibility for my actions and try to make amends. After a point, I lost my cool and started accusing him of being involved in the affair, and he was equally responsible for the situation we were in. The argument escalated quickly, with both of us trading hurtful words back and forth. Eventually, we both realized that pointing fingers wouldn't solve anything, and we needed to find a way to move forward and come out from the situation. We decided to try and make things work in each of our marriages. I was still living in the same house with Paul. Though we stopped talking, there were a lot of things that we had to figure out before we decided to separate. Paul had done something a few days later that I never imagined him to do. He had accidentally replaced my footage with Caleb with one of my office presentations, which led to first-hand embarrassment at work. This led to a lot of drama at work. I had suddenly become the talk of the town, and I could see that all eyes walked alongside me every time I passed by people. I had been asked a lot by random men at work to sleep around with them and that I would not be disappointed. I was feeling harassed by the constant judgment of me being willing to sleep with any man just to pleasure myself. I felt disrespected and objectified, as if my worth was solely based on my willingness to engage in sexual activities. It was frustrating to be constantly bombarded with inappropriate advances in a professional setting. I had written a formal complaint to my boss regarding the shameless sexual advances that I was being objectified to by the male employees. I was called in by my boss expecting to find a solution for my problems. I went in hopeful that this might end the torture to some extent. However, to my disappointment, my boss dismissed my complaint and instead advised me to just ignore it and not make a big deal out of it. I was about to protest when he casually mentioned that he had 2 tickets for an event and would like me to join him. We could go out for a fancy dinner after that and have a good time. Now I know the reason for him to dismiss my complaints. He wanted a share of me as well. I felt disgusted, but I knew that this was not the right time to react. I told him that I would think about it and let him know and left his office. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being manipulated. It was clear that his invitation was a way to distract me from my concerns and get what he wanted. I went home and felt like I was all alone in this world. I did not have a man to protect me or my dignity. Everyone I knew just wanted to sleep with me. Paul had filed for divorce and moved in with a new girlfriend already. Caleb was kicked out of his house by his wife, but had refused to do anything to do with me. I felt abandoned and vulnerable, unsure of who to turn to for support. It was a harsh reality check that left me feeling lost and betrayed by those I once trusted. There was no one I could turn to and share my feelings or ask for advice. I realized I needed to rely on myself for strength and guidance, as the people I once counted on had let me down. It was a painful lesson in self-reliance and resilience that I knew I had to face head-on. I, however, felt that some of Paul's actions could have been avoided and helped me not to face public humiliation every waking day of my life. I am not very sure what I'm going to do going forward. I might leave my job if my boss's advances get a little too out of hand. I'm even considering moving to a different city and start afresh. I regret my actions and feel like a lot of it could be avoided if I'd controlled my lust and not answered to Caleb's advances. I knew that my passion and one weak moment of lust led to ruining my life to the extent that I could not take the gaze of men objectifying me. It was getting a bit too much to handle. I am glad that I decided to put my thoughts on paper. I feel a little better now that a lot from my mind has been dumped out there. Writing down my thoughts has helped me process them and gain some clarity. It's a therapeutic way for me to organize my feelings and work through any issues I may be facing. Most of you who have read so far about my rant and feelings would feel that maybe I deserve all of this that I have gone through. I am guilty for my actions, but I also believe that I did not deserve such a severe punishment. I hope that others who have been reading my story feel the same. Thank you everyone for taking time out and trying to understand what I had gone through and what I had to face after my affair was revealed to my husband.